Hello and welcome to This Week at the Movies. I'm Matt.
I'm Eric.
And this week we are looking at some frightful films, as the big release of the week was The Exorcist Believer, which is a reboot of the franchise from David Gordon Green. You may recognize that name and the word reboot of a horror franchise because this is not his first trip down the line. David Gordon Green kind of started out doing comedy films with Danny McBride, and then a few years ago decided to reboot the Halloween franchise, making a direct sequel to the original Halloween that returned the original characters. They made 3 of those films. Halloween Ends wrapped up that trilogy about this time last year. And now he has turned to the Exorcist franchise with The Exorcist Believer, which, Eric, believe it or not, is meant to be the first part of a new trilogy
I know.
in this world. Returning original stars Ellen Burstyn in her first Exorcist film since the original, which was released 50 years ago in 1973. If you've read my review that I published on the site on Friday, you'll know I didn't love this movie. Eric, did you like it better than me?
No.
Did you just like it a lot?
Do you want me to elaborate on it, or you want to talk about it some? Because David Gordon Green, you know, I'm interested in him. I was interested in him as a filmmaker because of projects like Stronger, the Boston Marathon survivor Jake Gyllenhaal starring movie, where I don't know. It's kind of like Adam McKay's transition out of Anchorman style comedies into more creative, like more authorial, stampy, like projects. I don't know. It just David Gordon Green 5 years ago came out with a movie that paid off a franchise of 40 years with a sequel that showed a lot of people who had affinity for that franchise that he understood the core of what made the original work and made this huge sweep of wiping away all of the sequels so that you could have something in the spirit of the original that didn't take away from the original in the way that some people feel the other sequels did. And just a few people were jostled by a twist in that movie where the psychiatrist turns out to have been inspired by Michael Myers instead of wanting to capture him, and wants to, like, you know, he like wears his mask and he kills people. And it's a very bizarre, like, stick out moment that most people point out as being the odd issue with an otherwise fantastic, like, movie that really understands its franchise. And every single time since then, David Gordon Green has done a single thing that is not in the spirit of what he believes fans want for the franchise, but what in the spirit of he wants to make as a movie. It gets negative backlash. He stands by it and gives some explanation that doesn't make sense, that causes dumpster fires. Now, I really like Halloween. Can't stand Halloween Kills. It irritates the crap out of me, mostly because the movies that are the worst to me are the movies that have potential and waste it. So the problem with this movie, The Exorcist Believer, is it doesn't understand the original movie, I don't think. And it doesn't even have any potential to waste. I don't even know if I would give this a thumbs down as much as I would just give this a nothing. Like, what during the making of this, I wonder, was the draw of, like, this means something and we haven't seen it before and people will come to the theater and have this experience. You know, I can't think of a single aspect. Like, none of the possession stuff. They took a little bit from Haunting in Connecticut, a little bit from different cultures, a little bit from the original Exorcist, and they just kind of mixed it together into I would argue, an extremely dulled down version of the sort of horrors that you see in the original movie. And the pace of this movie was like breakneck to the point that there's basically like 4 set pieces. There's like get to know their life, the girls are back and they're not okay. Ellen Burstyn visits the lady's house, the exorcism scene, and then the movie is over. And that was not enough time for me to feel anything. I think my favorite sequences in the movie are probably what happens to Ellen Bernstein and Burstyn and um the relationship between Leslie Odom Jr. and Lydia Jewett, the father daughter duo. Um, it just it was like heavy handed, slightly obvious what they were going for. Nothing in the middle of the movie built off of the payoffs at the beginning and end of what they were doing with the father and daughter and mother and trading lives and any of that stuff. It just happened. And for you to be like, from the person who understood Halloween so much that he re-brought interest to an entire franchise 40 years old, comes another entry where a guy claims he understands another franchise that's 50 years old, that's had a lot of difficulty with sequels. I got to admit that my expectations were like really high. That this was going to be one of the ones where I'm just going to prove that I understand this franchise. And he didn't bother. And it just really bummed me out. And it just makes me realize that David Gordon Green is interested in movies he likes. And if I happen to like it, lucky me.
Yeah, I mean, if you saw my tweet on Thursday when I saw this movie,
Oh, I missed it.
or what I put, it was basically the screenshot of my Letterboxd, where I said
Oh,
I
okay.
can't wait to see which horror franchise David Gordon Green decides to ruin next.
Mm-hmm.
If they were only making one, it would still be a bummer. I don't understand how they're making a trilogy or why they're making a trilogy um, out of this. So that would be my first. But here's what I'm going to say. Like, the original Exorcist is a classic film that has stood up for 50 years. We're going to talk about it here in a minute, but there are kind of 2 types to me of exorcism films. There's ones that use the rite of exorcism as a plot device to drive a horror film story. And that to me is how I would classify The Exorcist. You know, perhaps the novel from Blady was more interested in a spiritual exploration, but the movie itself isn't so much interested in the spiritual exploration or the religious implications of this as using a demon possession and a rite of exorcism to drive a horror story, and it works very well. The second type of exorcism film is one that is very interested in exploring the deeper religious implications of demon possession and horror stories. I would argue The Conjuring kind of takes that path. That's what Ed and Eileen Warren's work was kind of all about. One of my favorite films in that genre, The Exorcism of Emily Rose, is based on a true story. Scott Derrickson graduated from the same college as me, the Biblical Institute of Los Angeles, and crafts a script that draws very heavily on scripture and is very interested in the theology of demon possession and evil and demonic forces in the world.
Mm-hmm.
This film from David Gordon Green doesn't do either and tries to do both at the same time. And it doesn't work for me as a straight up horror movie because first of all, the first hour is insanely boring. You said you liked what they did with Ellen Burstyn. I didn't really care for it. Like, what the heck are they doing? And then you have her scene where she comes in and you're like, is she going to bring this wealth of experience? No, she's going to get, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
shouldn't see
yeah.
this movie. She's going to get stabbed in the eyes.
Yeah.
And the cameo at the end, which I won't ruin, but everyone and their brother should have been able to see coming,
Oh, it was such a groan.
wasn't a big moment for me. I knew
Yeah.
that I knew 100% we're going there. In fact, I pulled out my phone 20 minutes into the movie and started looking to see if that actress was listed on the
Yeah.
credits because I was 100% sure I was going to see her. And I'm guessing that's going to be a big part of whatever it is going forward. You know, it's
See,
credit to David Gordon Green that he's able to get people interested in rebooting these franchises and get the original stars to come back and commit to them, because I assume that both Ellen Burstyn and our mystery person are going to be involved in the next chapter as I guess Leslie Odom Jr. You know, because that's based on the pattern that they're doing. That, you know, they've somehow got to put it to bed, and they're at times trying to say it's the same demon or related to the same demon as the Exorcist, but they don't draw a fine line there. But the other part, I can tell he was trying to make some kind of commentary about spirituality, but I have no idea what it is. You have this exorcism scene that, past the point of all reason, you have basically a lapsed nun, a witch doctor, a Baptist minister who I can't imagine would have agreed to this,
uh-huh.
and a Catholic priest, and a
Yeah.
few agnostics who are all coming together in what was the focal point. This
Yeah, they're
exorcism
all
was never
throwing
going to
their own
work
ideas.
because
Yeah.
it was never one cohesive moment.
Yeah.
And that exorcism scene was entirely underwhelming. Like, we're going to talk about an Exorcist sequel on here that I don't really consider, that's really more of a crime drama than an Exorcist film, and even it has a better exorcism scene than
Yeah.
this movie. You know, the exorcism scene was underwhelming. Everything was underwhelming. The idea that any people in the hospital would have let them pull either of those girls out of the mental ward to
Mhm.
just
Oh my
take care
gosh.
of them at home.
The
You
girl who
know,
stabbed someone in the eyes is just like under minimal supervision care.
well, she's not apparently in trouble.
I
Yeah.
yeah, but that's like that's insane. I mean, that's the whole that to me is the whole thing about the original Exorcism is it's this horror of procedurally putting truth behind the idea of you losing control of that safety and innocence of being able to protect your child. And like there is a lot of faith behind the movie, but like you said, the movie is not about trying to make a statement about faith as much as it
I think
is.
he was trying to make a statement. I just don't. I think it's like it's
No,
almost
no, the
reminds me.
original.
Oh, the original wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's like the original is driven in truth, and there was like a lot of supervision and a lot of research done through the Catholic faith and all this kind of stuff. But it's intentionally grounded in a realistic, truthful like suggestion of the horror of losing something like that and losing control and whatnot. And that's where a lot of the fear comes from, is and they kind of sprinkled at the idea in this movie that like the horror is Reagan is going through these medical procedures that are borderline traumatic, that for a child to go through, and you just having to like suffer and not know how to help your daughter going through that. And the idea is like, how will you finally overcome such a monumental obstacle in someone's life? And there's so much weight to that in those relationships. And in this movie, it's like, well, they got to give her a shot to calm her down because she was screaming a lot. Like,
Well, and he has like a neo non-specific approach to spirituality, but at the same time, they pretty heavily imply in the middle of the film that the girls somehow, like Jesus, went to hell for 3 days. Of course, Jesus was crucified and killed, so I don't know how those girls made it there.
hey, 3 days and 3 days, right? Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't know
so
that
it
scene.
just, but it reminds me, one of your frustrations with Halloween Kills was that it was clear he was trying to make some kind of commentary about society writ large, but you just can't figure out what it is, and it was executed so poorly that you couldn't take anything away from it.
Yep.
And it almost feels the same approach with spirituality in this one, that I know he's trying to make some kind of comment, especially with the way they all come together and Ann Dowd's
Yeah.
story and everything. But I can't figure out what it is or what I'm
Yeah,
supposed to take
there's
away.
there's something about like the core of humanity behind branching ideologies of religion, but there's some kind of like, and maybe see, here's the thing. I would say maybe that was a seed to be explored in sequels, but here it is ridiculous to even begin to assume that we would know anything about the sequel from the person who gave you Halloween Ends after Halloween Kills.
But also, so this one's Exorcist Believer. The next one's supposed to be Exorcist Deceiver. Who was the believer?
Oh, who knows?
Well, I mean, you should have at least been
The
able to come
dad should
away.
have like, I guess the dad became a believer, but a believer
In
in
what?
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 Because it
Yeah,
looked like
and
the
in what
personal
way?
connection is what
Yeah.
saved him. And then there's this thing, and I'm really excited to talk about this.
Or
The
was
ending
Ellen
monologue.
Burstyn the one that becomes the believer because she talks about having studied it for a long time and just not knowing. I
If
don't know.
she had been the core, if she had been like the Nick Fury to assemble all of these religious folk in the community, and the idea was
Well,
she
that
was
would have
like,
made more sense because based on her years of research, I actually don't understand. I mostly don't understand why they pulled her back in because
yeah,
other than to waste 20 minutes of, maybe this movie would have been better at 90 minutes than it was at 111 minutes nominally but it was very slow to get anything going. It was very slow to develop anything, and it just, I don't know, very frustrating. I ended up giving it, a thumbs down. I know I got yours. you you didn't like it enough to even get a thumbs down, which is a
yeah, yeah,
pretty bold. Well,
I'm just so,
we
I'm
don't
just,
want to dwell too much on David Gordon Green's disappointing of us because we'll have two more opportunities, it sounds like, for that to happen. But
oh, we'll see.
we mentioned,
That face.
yeah, Reagan just, she wasn't possessed. She had just seen what was about to come with Exorcist Lever. But I mentioned 50 years now. William Friedkin passed away. Ironically, his final film that he directed, which is The Caine Mutiny Court Martial, started streaming on Friday on Paramount Plus and premieres tonight on Showtime. Was much more enjoyable for me than The Exorcist Believer. But Friedkin, he had a couple of great films in the 70s, French Connection, which I really enjoyed. And then we get to The Exorcist here in 1973, Max von Sydow, Jason Miller, Linda Blair, who was pictured there as Reagan, and Ellen Burstyn. As I mentioned, there's, to me, a couple of kinds of exorcism films. This one kind of falls into the former, and I think that's why it always comes up this time of year, kind of one of the classic horror movies, because it's deeply unsettling. The things the little girl says is deeply unsettling. It's unsettling in 2023. You can only imagine how people were, she does something personal to herself with a cross. That doesn't go over that. It's kind of shocking now. I'm sure it was really shocking in 1973. Just the way William Friedkin put that together, the stirring musical score. You hear a few beats of that song and you know exactly what's coming. You get some chills. The way they did some of the shots, some of the iconic shots in this film as well. I've always enjoyed it. It is actually up there in my top 50 films of the 70s that I've been going through. Ironically, I think that posted for me on Friday too. I believe it's number 12 for me. But Eric, how do you feel about the original Exorcist?
It was one of the freakiest movies I ever saw when I was way too young. And I think that's like most of my generation's experience with the movie is like, it had that reputation as the scariest movie of all time. So whenever you snuck and watched it, depending on what version you saw, I know that probably the scene, oddly enough, that sticks out the most in people's memory, and they even made like an action figure of this once, is when she comes down the stairs backwards like a spider. Like that is only in the
Either that or
director's
some of the
cut,
projectile vomiting.
which would be in the original as well. Yeah, there's it is shocking and it's unsettling and it gets in your skin and it's not okay, and it makes you feel like something's staring at you all the time. And I love, for one, as I grow to be an adult, it's incredible, the production design. Like old man makeup that, like, in 4K 50 years later looks better than I just also watched, what was it? Glass from M. Night Shyamalan. I just rewatched that. And like you have
But why
Mr.
though?
Glass's mom.
Was The Exorcist Believer not enough for you?
Yeah, right. Well, you know what? At least M. Night Shyamalan works really well with actors and got meaningful feel. I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna be nice to The Exorcist. The Exorcist is like, I don't know. Ellen Burstyn should be like an annoying, grieving mother. Like if that's all she's doing for the whole movie, but she's not. I feel heartfelt for her the entire time. Max von Sydow, like, there's this thing about his character that he's sort of tangential to the story, and then just comes in when he's needed. And Father Karras is really the character that we're focused on the most. But there's almost something, I don't know. It's something about his sickness and his commitment and the mystery behind his character really, really works for me. And like, this movie is not called The Exorcism; it's called The Exorcist. And I feel like it's such a striking thing where you're sort of that same exact idea where you're like, well, the person who completed the exorcism was Father Karras. And so you sort of think about, like, it compels you to think about what is an exorcist and what is an exorcism and what are they trying to do and what is their real goal. And like, I don't know, it's such a rewarding story that doesn't bother trying to force you to think about things. And because it's so rewarding, it makes me think about so many things. And I don't know. I get something a little bit new out of it every time. Plus, there's the theatrical versus the extended version, and that's the same thing we're going to get into when we get into the talking about this other one. Where there's something different about the pacing and the shocks and the things that they do throughout the story, different editing of things, and I think either one has its pros and cons. But yeah, either one is just like, it's like just like an extremely effective horror. I mean, that is like a 2 thumbs up movie. Like, even if you hate your entire day because you watched it, it's because it was so effective. And like, yeah.
Well, before we go, we're going to look at one other one. This was Eric's suggestion, actually, which is The Exorcist 3. This one actually directed by William Peter Blatty, based on his follow-up novel, Legion. It came out in 1990. There is a Exorcist 2, which also features Linda Blair and is not very good and was not based on the novel. It was just kind of an attempt to capitalize on the franchise. But The Exorcist 3 returns Jason Miller, who was Father Karras, adds in George C. Scott, and kind of an original story. This is not one that I had seen before. I actually watched it yesterday to get ready for this. It's not what I would say, for me, it wasn't what you think of when you think of exorcism films or film like The Exorcist. This one is more like, I'd almost liken it to something like Seven, where George C. Scott is a police lieutenant and he's kind of tracking a set of really brutal, gruesome serial murders. It's not till kind of later in the game that you realize the tie back to the demonic possession that was taking place in The Exorcist. I would say I was really fascinated by this until the third act. And it kind of breaks down a little bit for me there. But I did like it better than The Exorcist Believer.
Mm-hmm.
But Eric, I know this is one that you really enjoy, so take it away.
Well, fun fact. There's the movie that you'll watch, The Exorcist 3. And like you said, the exorcism scene in that movie, the third act, where an exorcist, again, sort of comes out of the woodwork to kind of take care of the issue. It's kind of sudden, and it's effective and creepy in some ways, but it's not like the greatest ending. Like there's something that changes about the movie at that point. And it's because it was a studio note and it was a mandate and it was reshoots, and the movie was originally called Legion based off of the thing, but they wanted to tie it in with an exorcism to make money off of the original. And if you get this Blu-ray or any version, you will have a director's cut, which has the original scenes, unfortunately not like remastered and upgraded. So you have to watch the quality of the film dip in order to like watch the original cut of the movie. But there is no exorcism in the original cut of the movie. There is a very cold, appropriate, hard-hitting ending from George C. Scott's character and how he deals with the person in that cell. And I don't want to spoil it because I think it's worth watching the entire other version, because Brad Dourif, who plays the possessed person in that we're talking about, absolutely shines. I think he's like a rock star in this movie, and he has more time to play in that version, and the focus is where it needs to be. I think some of the scares in this movie are some of the creepiest things I've seen in any horror movie, with lady crawling on the walls and, you know, the jump scare, like the big one. George C. Scott is an amazing actor. Between this and Changeling and a couple of other movies that, like, I don't remember everything that I've seen him in. Most of the time he's like
Patton.
a general. He's Patton. Yeah. Like, yeah. But he's incredible. And he's actually playing a character from The Exorcist that was like a side character and whatnot. And so it's kind of hard to recognize, kind of like you said, at a certain point you realize that this is directly connected to the first one, but it's not trying to make that really matter all that much. It's really telling its own story. And so I love both versions of this movie, but I really feel like if you had that sense of like, this is sort of a crime thriller first, exorcism movie second, and you want to see a version where the movie pays off as just that sort of 70s cynical crime thriller, watch the director's cut. Because oof, like it is it's so unsettling and effective. And there's so many, like, you can look up a lot of videos of people breaking down the dialogue scenes between him and his friends, and just what it means for this character to like be a believer and not a believer, and so many other things. There's just a lot to chew on. And in that same way that The Exorcist feels, that like you're watching kind of a compelling murder mystery case that has some supernatural tweaks to it, but because you're watching this compelling story happen, you have a lot to think about outside of that. So the implications of what people do in this movie give you thought and give you something to chew on. So yeah, love Exorcist, love The Exorcist 3.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting film, and I'm glad that I took a chance to see it. I've seen a lot of the other Exorcist films, and I've never seen actually The Exorcist 2, and I had never seen 3. I've seen more of the modern ones where they've gone back and even done prequels or sequels or requels or whatever things they're trying to do. So, you know, if you were thinking about seeing David Gordon Green's film, you can just stay at home instead and watch the original Exorcist, which is streaming on Max, or Exorcist 3, which is on Prime and Peacock and Max. And apparently it's on like every stream. I don't know how that works, because I thought films could only be on one streaming service. Sometimes you can't find them on any, but this one was on like 3 I had to choose from. I watched it off Peacock, so cool. You know, you have plenty of options. Next week we are going to keep the horror groove going. No, we are not reviewing the Taylor Swift concert film, although I'm sure it has its own set of horrors. We are actually going to take a dip toward the small screen, as Fall of the House of Usher, the latest from Mike Flanagan, drops on Netflix on Thursday. We're going to be looking at that, and we're going to be talking about some of our favorite Mike Flanagan projects. And you know what the great news for you is? All of them are streaming mostly on Netflix, so you can just dive right in at home. And then the week after that, there's this tiny Martin Scorsese film. I don't know if many people have heard about it. It's like something called Killers of the Flower Moon. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be a big film.
Is one of those indie directors people don't know about. So yeah.
That is like 217 minutes. So I'm already doing rear end exercises to get ready for sitting that long. But we will be taking a look at that the following week. So that gives you a little sneak peek of what's coming. So it should be a fun October. Little Mike Flanagan, little Martin Scorsese. Much better way to end the month than starting out with some David Gordon Green.
Unfortunately.
But until then, we will see you at the movies.